I'd like to pivot a little bit to free will,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to think where to start on this. So, if I understand some public intellectuals, I think Sam Harris is on one end of the spectrum, saying that free will doesn't exist. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, and then obviously you have maybe. Well, let's not go too far to like the Christians. What they, let's stay in the scientific realm, for
Yeah.
example. Where are you from? Yes, free will is 100% something we have, and Sam Harris is we do not have free will.
Yeah. So I'm at the yes, free will is something we definitely have end.
Okay.
But I also think it's not just a yes or no question, right? It's not a black or white. Either we have no free will or we have 100% free will and can do whatever we want at any moment, right? Those are not
Okay.
our two options. And
Okay.
we talked earlier about our having predispositions, our being sort of wired a certain way, right? And in a sense, well, first of all, that just makes us who we are, but it also is a set of constraints, right? So I have a set of constraints on the way that I act. So I'm not free to just do anything at any moment. In fact, that would be weird, right? So if you want to
Right.
say, for some people, the only definition of free will that meets their criteria is that you're entirely unconstrained, you're unaffected by any prior event or any prior cause whatsoever. And
Right.
that's just weird. Like, what would you be? You wouldn't be like, that means you're unaffected by evolution and human nature generally, by your own genetics, by all of your experiences, by your memories, by your goals. Like, you wouldn't be a person, you wouldn't be a self if that were
Right.
true. All of those things are what make you who you are, right? So those are the things that you bring to bear when you're encountering things in the world. The question then is, how much control do you have in any moment over what you actually do? And some people would say, look, there's all these influences, and it just leaves no room for anything to be up to you in the
Hmm.
moment. You really have
Right.
no choice. You're just acting out your programming like an NPC in a computer game, right? In a sense, with that view, and Robert Sapolsky, for example, is another person who argues this. You just disappear. You're not anything at all in that. You're just a vehicle for these programmings to play out. You're just an automaton. And
Right.
I first of all, I think that's a really nihilistic, anti-humanistic sort of view. But secondly, there's no evidence for it. Like, the science just doesn't say that, right? Of course, we can see that neuroscience is showing us how this machinery works when we're making a decision. For example, we can see we're using these brain circuits and those brain circuits, and we're representing goals here and possible actions, and we're weighing them up and choosing
Right.
between them. And some people look at that, Robert Sapolsky, for example, and he'll say, well, look, it's your brain doing it. Your brain is making the decision. Whereas I look at it and say, well, yeah, I'm using my brain to make a decision, but I'm making it. Like, where else would I be? What else would I be using? It has to happen somewhere. Like, it's not magic, right? There's
Yeah.
a material basis for my decision making, and it involves my brain circuits, but that doesn't mean that the circuits are making the decision and I'm not doing anything. Like, I'm suddenly not involved in that. That's just not accurate. And it's not accurate to say that all of our predispositions basically at every moment, narrow our options to one, which is the way, again, that Robert presents it. He said all of these prior factors collectively determine your intentions right now, and then you just act on them, right? And then the next moment is just the same and the same and the same and the same, and you're just a robot. There's no reason to think that. It doesn't match our psychology, right? When we have a conflict, for example, we're really deciding what to do. It doesn't feel like that we're not doing anything in that deliberation. It feels like that's something that we're
Sure.
actively involved in, and the end point is not pre-stated in some. We're just trying to discover it. That just doesn't fit. But also doesn't fit the neuroscience, doesn't fit the genetics, and doesn't make much sense philosophically speaking either.
Yeah, because I thought about this a lot. So to take you back, the first time I thought about free will, I was reading Scientific American Mind, It used to be a small publication put up by Scientific American, and it was all about new things in the mind. I think they folded it into the magazine now, but it was amazing. I mean, every month
Hmm.
I used to wait for this publication to come out. And there was a study that I think was just half a page, like a little blurb. And they did a study where, see if I don't botch this. So they're scanning the brains of the participants, and they had their hands on two different buttons. And at some point, the person had to decide which button they were going to push. And what they saw in the scans was that a part of the brain was lighting up that was making a decision that was outside of the consciousness of the clients. And so what they presupposed at that time was that the brain was making the decision at a certain time before consciousness was able to understand what was happening. So
Yeah.
somebody would, press that button, but the brain had already decided it.
Right.
And so that's and this was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. It's when I really thought, like, oh shit, maybe we don't actually have free will. Maybe we are not so much NPCs, but a bit of a victim is also too soon, but we are a product of all of our experiences and our genetics and everything
Sure.
that kind of gets played out in real time.
Yeah.
With that said, I choose to completely believe your stance, because I just like, if I want to think of the future of the world, I'm not really optimistic today.
Yeah.
However, I choose to be an optimist because I don't think we have any choice.
Yeah.
I'm not going to
So
walk around in the world. Go ahead.
right. No. I mean, it's great. So this is a great. It's a great example of a study that got a lot of play, right? In the and the implications of it for free will have been really kind of extrapolated too far for my liking. So first of all, when you said, we're a product of our experiences and our genes and everything, yeah, we are, right? That's absolutely true. Of course we are. That's what makes us ourselves, and that's what keeps us being ourselves through time. Is that we keep acting like ourselves, right? We act in character. In fact, so much
Right.
so that when somebody acts out of character, we usually take it
It's a
as a
brain tumor.
sign of mental illness, right?
Right.
Exactly, right. Okay, so there's that. First of all, but secondly, like, a lot of our behavior is habitual, and Freud was completely right. A lot of our behavior is subconscious. It's still our behavior. So yes, we have lots of subconscious motivations that we're not thinking about a lot of the time. Most of our behavior on a day-to-day basis is habitual, and the reason for that, what that means is that as we've gone through life, we've encountered certain scenarios over and over again, and we've learned that it's a good thing to do X versus Y in that scenario, right? And then we just don't have to think about it. That's great. That's super efficient way to manage behavioral control as you go through life, not having to go back to first principles every time you're faced with any sort of thing to do in the world, right?
Right.
So the fact that a lot of our behavior is subconscious doesn't mean that doesn't undermine free will, unless you think of free will as necessarily just involving this conscious, active, deliberative control. And the thing is that even for habitual behaviors where we're not engaging that, we can engage it, right? We often can switch out of the automatic way of behaving and say, actually, no, I better pay attention here. Something has changed. I need to, think about what to do. So even, say, driving home on your normal route, you're on autopilot. You're not thinking about it. You might be thinking about something completely different,
Right.
right? But if there's a detour, then you engage this other kind of way of thinking. So we do absolutely have different levels of behavioral control. All of them are us controlling what we're doing. It's just some of them are control policies that we've integrated into our behavioral set, set of control parameters, and that's a good thing, right? The particular example that you talk about, this flicking your wrist or hitting one button or the other, is
Yeah.
interesting because for the most part, when in that experimental setup, nothing rides on the outcome, right? They expressly tell the person, do this whenever you want, hit the right or the left button, whichever, doesn't matter, nothing happens.
Exactly.
You're not getting a
Yeah.
reward, right? So what happens is the people are completely indifferent to that, right? They're sitting there, they agreed to do the experiment. That was when they took a deliberative decision. And then they're sitting down there and the experimenter is expecting them to do something every once in a while, but it doesn't matter when. And basically what they do is they say, they kind of let parts of their brain circuitry in effect make the decision for them, right? So the brain circuits are kind of noisy. The noise can accumulate up to some level, and then you flick your wrist, right? So because nothing rides on that, and because there's no reason to choose one way or the other,
Right.
that's actually a really good strategy. What's important, and this comes up, more ecologically, when an animal or a person has to make a decision and they just don't have enough information, right? So they don't have any reason to prefer A versus B. What's important is that they do something, right? The important thing
Right.
is that they don't just sit there paralyzed with indecision, waiting for their brain circuits to come up with a decision when they don't have enough information to make it, right? And
Hmm.
so we have mechanisms to break the deadlock, to let us actually do something, and sometimes to do something at random. For many species, when they have an escape response from a predator, for example, they escape at random, and you can really see the noise in their nervous system that is
Wow.
determining which way they go. That turns out to be super adaptive, because a predictable escape response means that the predator can predict where you're going to go and just eat you, right?
Right.
So what we have to do, I think, is distinguish different types of decisions, right? There's ones that are really habitual, where we absolutely know what we want to do. There's ones that are where we're indifferent, or we don't have enough information, but we should do something. And under those situations, the noisy bit in our brain circuits may be allowed to sort of determine what happens. And then there's the ones that we really care about, where we have good reasons for doing two different things, right? And we're conflicted, and we have to weigh them up in this process of deliberation, which, importantly, is a process. It's not just an instantaneous transition from one state to another. We really have
Right.
to think about things in a way that, until we think about them, we actually don't know how we're weighing up the various factors.